Should be working.
Hi, everyone. We are just live now with our live stream, and we will just be starting in just a couple of minutes.
Here, just for the next minute, I'm just going to take our video. We're hearing. Okay. I don't think that's one of us that I'm hearing. Are you hearing that background noise?
I am hearing that.
Hold on one
Is there a way
second.
to turn that off?
Hold on.
I don't.
That's Bill. Otherwise, it's audience. Cameo appearance from the kitchen.
My granddaughter just came over a few minutes ago. I told them they had to whisper. So,
Oh, nice. Life in action.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
All right, Belle. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Belle.
Tim, you're at BC also, are you? Well, you are both.
I am.
Okay.
We'll get into because we can start. We're live right now.
We
so people
officially
are coming
start?
in.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, guys.
Welcome, everyone who is joining us. And you can put messages in the audience display there. If you want to let us know that you're here, that would be fantastic. We can't really see you all, but hopefully you can see us. But if you want to send us a message with a thumbs up that you can see us, that would be fantastic. So I wanted to start by introducing our panelists today. We'll start with Tim and I are authors of an upcoming book that is launching on Tuesday. And we're so excited to bring you this conversation live with two best-selling authors, Ned Johnson and Bill Stixrud, who are founders of their own organizations. Ned Johnson is the founder of Prep Matters, and Bill Stixrud is the founder of his organization, and he'll tell you a little bit more about that as well. The two of them have co-authored 2 books, and they are The Self-Driven Child and now newly launched What Do You Say? And it's just a great follow-up to their first book that has been wildly successful. So we are so excited to talk with them today about both books. But let's just go ahead and give a moment for Ned and Bill to talk a little bit more about themselves. And I just would love to really hear your origin story, because it's interesting, the partnership that you have and the different skill sets and backgrounds that you bring to your work. And it would be great if you could just start a little bit by sharing your story.
Sure. You want to go first?
You go. I'll be Robin.
Well, so I'm a neuropsychologist, and I make a living by testing kids and teenagers and young adults if they're having learning problems or social problems or emotional problems or attention problems. So I'm trying to figure out what's going well, what's not going well, and how to help them. And I've lectured. I've been lecturing a lot in the DC area for the last almost 40 years. And somebody introduced me to Ned, and they told me about Ned and said, "You guys think so much alike." And so we got together, and even though I'm 20 years older than Ned is, we just had this kind of very shared kind of interest. So we started lecturing together initially about motivation, and then about the effects of stress and insufficient sleep on kids' brains and their development. We decided to write a book, and Ned has a reputation as being this miraculous SAT prep, ACT prep guy who helps kids do well by helping them realize it's not that big a deal and really building their confidence. It's really beautiful what he does. But that's kind of somebody. A couple of people say we introduced you to. We aren't sure which one actually did.
I'll give Kathleen. We have a mutual friend, Kathleen, who's probably the most brilliant college counselor in the universe in our view. Yeah, so I'm a test prep geek, right? I've spent something like 50,000 hours helping kids prepare for and battle this kind of alphabet of infernal standardized tests. And so that the tests are a little dreary, but the kids are fantastic. And so I have, a long time ago, I realized that performance on these tests had a lot more, and motivating to prepare for them had a lot more to do than just the content of it. So early on, sort of trying to beg, borrow, and steal from people like Bill and psychologists and neuroscientists about the effects of sleep on brains, about how to motivate kids. I mean, I have neither carrot nor stick, neither of those arrows in my quiver. So how do I help kids be motivated in a healthy way? And then when they finally get to these quote unquote high stakes tests, how do they have the brain state that allows them to do their best, even though they're performing under some pressure? So as Bill said, we've been palling around for a while, and when we've been doing all this lecture about how do kids become intrinsically motivated, Bill had said, it seems like we should write some of this stuff down. Maybe we should do a book. And we were batting ideas around. He said, does it seem to you like there's an organizing principle of all the things that we advise to kids, advice we give to kids and parents? And I said, it feels to me, and I was really reflecting back so much what Bill had shared with me. I said, it feels to me like everything that we're doing is trying to increase for kids the sense of control that they feel, about themselves, about the world that they're living in. And so that really became the organizing principle. And I think a helpful and powerful message that's kind of the core of the self-driven child.
Can you just speak to like, how did you come up with that insight? Because it seems to me like you probably were working with thousands of students and you were like seeing because I love that you landed on that, but there's so many other things you could have landed on. So how did you actually come to autonomy as locus of control as the thing that you wanted to be like, that's our first principle?
Well, the two things that that we saw a lot, was just even pre-pandemic, this huge incidence of mental health problems in young people, and and also so many kids they don't have healthy self-motivation. One of the things I love about your book is orienting kids towards purpose, to having a meaningful life as opposed to just jumping through hoops, and every year it's just preparing for the next year. I love the way you think. But it was these two things. It's this unhealthy motivation where kids, they didn't, I'm not doing well in school, so what's the point of trying? Or these kind of obsessively driven kids who had no peace, no sense of what's important in life. And so we knew, I learned in 2008, Sonia Lupian, who's a neuroscientist, said there's 4 things in life that make it stressful. And she summarized it with the acronym NUTS, and it's novelty, unpredictability, perceived threat, and a low sense of control. And they say that the stress scientists say that low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. So we're thinking, well, if depression, anxiety, substance use are all stress-related problems, and sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And so many kids feel overwhelmed, or they just feel kind of passive and helpless. This must be a big deal. And also, every place we look to understand how do kids become self-motivated, all the arrows pointed in the direction of autonomy. Self-determination theory, which holds that we have 3 needs for autonomy and competence and relatedness, and the autonomy is the key. And that the growth mindset, all that work. What is a growth mindset other than I have the ability to change my own life, to get better through my own effort? So it just looked like every place we looked, the sense of control, which we think about in 2 dimensions. One is that subjective sense that you mentioned, Tim, that subjective sense of agency or autonomy. This is my life. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm not helpless. I'm not hopeless. And the brain state that supports that, in which the prefrontal cortex regulates the rest of the brain. And so that's how we got there. I mean, Ned, did you go?
Well, yeah. And to your point, when we started looking at it, it's sense of control. I mean, it's good for mental health, for physical health, for career success, college success, learning success, longevity. I mean, the work of Ellen Langer, when you have folks who are living in assisted living facilities in the last years of their lives, if you give them choices, right? These young people want to come and visit. Did you want them to come at 11 o'clock or 1 o'clock? If they have plants in the room that they get to water rather than someone else water, they live longer, right? I mean, it's everywhere, right? And then, of course, the brain science. I mean, we're huge fans of the work of Steve Mayer with Martin Seligman, Learn Helplessness, and how the idea that we were just talking with him last week, Bill, that when folks, particularly in adolescence, it appears that adolescents who have experience with something that's really that's a real challenge to them, that's a real threat, but they feel that there's something they can do, that they feel a sense of control, they can do something to cope, that this experience seems to rewire the brains in ways that, at least in adolescent rats, where they're doing this research, seems to last a lifetime. It's so
Yeah, it's just amazing. And
yeah, I'm just saying they do
yeah,
the adolescents to do worksheets rather than giving them really meaningful, experience that makes them feel meaningful, as you described, in ways that are challenge, and we're inoculating them against future stress. It's like, that's a big opportunity.
yeah, I wonder if you could just even dive in more to like the current context that young people are in, as well as their parents and adults, because I think we have viewers who are maybe not even parenting, but they're tuning into this idea of the importance of self-control at a time when there's such a sense of helplessness. I wonder if you could share a little bit more about your observations about now and what the impact of our current events are on young people, old people, older people, on the on self-control, self agency.
Yeah, I mean, to begin with, the longer the kids are in school, the less autonomy they have. They have more autonomy in kindergarten than they do. You have to raise your 17-year-old girl, you have to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. I mean, okay, sure. Um, you know, but and these are all things that existed before the pandemic. What's happened, of course, with the pandemic, that the more stress there is in nervous systems, school systems, ecosystems, the more it affects everyone. And
Mhm.
one of the real challenges the last two things the last 2 years is that, one, we've had this exercise where everybody avoiding, like, take it. No, everybody can kill you, right? Avoid, 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 avoid. And we have in psychology this approach avoid dynamic, where if you're constantly avoiding, you have to actively work to approach, right? But so if you can feel like we got to push our kids out to do things, well, pushing someone to do something they don't want to do, that put me on a treadmill and crank up the volume. I want to get the heck off of it, right? If I have the control and can test myself, it changes that experience in a really profound way. The other thing, of course, with 2 years of COVID school, is there was 2 years of parents getting an upfront view of their children doing school, or, well, maybe not doing school, which made them crazy. And so when parents get stressed, because a low sense of control to them is so stressful to them, they have a tendency to want to exert more control, which is typically at the expense of their children. So they do things to feel better for themselves. They make their children feel worse. We talk about this in the book about work of Jesse Borelli about parental over control. And it's literally with a heart rate monitor. Right? So when I, as a parent, jump in and give my kid instruction, tell them what to do, I feel better, but my kid feels worse. And so it's hard, and we don't mean to blame parents, but we just want them to really understand that this is really important stuff. And there's enough adversity in the world. If we can support our kids' autonomy and support the healthy brain state, there's a chance that all of this adversity, as difficult as it is now, can actually be the opportunity to create another greatest generation, right? Because it's, as Tina Payne Bryce would say, adversity plus support, not adversity plus I'm telling you what to do. That's the model for developing resilience.
I love that. Yeah, and just like I think that really what you're saying about like as they go more and more in school, they have less and less control really resonates with us, because something that we've realized is it's kind of like when they're in high school, it's kind of like a cafeteria style where they have very limited options, right? It's just like you can get the blue milk or the red milk. You can choose between, do you want to do like AP US history or do you want to do honors history, right? They have like very
this thing you don't like or that other thing you don't like.
yeah, exactly. So then they're in high school and they're doing this and they're on these very guided rails, and then they finish high school and then they go to college, and then it becomes this all you can eat buffet, right? And it's literally the freedom is off. And so something that we've noticed around the autonomy is that we don't teach students to be autonomous in high school because of the educational structure because we're like, you need to do all of these things. And then we say, go to college and do what you love. You have all of these embarrassment of resources. And so that is a part of why we wrote the book, is because we really think that there is this navigational crisis, because students are going to college, but like if it's to continue the all you can eat buffet metaphor, they don't know what this food is. they're not even putting it on their plate. They're only doing what they want. And so like a big part of our book is how can you use purpose as this decision-making framework? And then if you use that, that's going to, I think, embed and lead to more autonomy. So I just love that example right there. Belle, you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I was just wondering, Bill, if you could share a little bit more. You started talking about some of the brain science behind the importance of self-control and agency. And, and at the same time, I wonder if, maybe you can speak a little bit to just some of the brain science behind the overload of too many choices, what Tim is saying, that you have control when you enter into the college years over your life in ways that you never have, but you're overwhelmed sometimes by too many options. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you can share about the brain science behind that.
So I think the most relevant thing is that when you're in your right mind, in other words, when kids are in the right mind, meaning that they're focused, they're engaged, they're motivated, they're goal-directed, and they aren't highly stressed and exhausted. The prefrontal cortex, the most recently evolved part of the brain, that can actually think and put things in perspective and calm you down once you start to get stressed, regulates the rest of the brain, including the amygdala and the other deeper part of the brain that are involved in the stress response. And a lot of research has shown that the most reliable marker of emotional health is the strength of the connections between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. And that's what we want. We want kids to develop a brain where the prefrontal cortex is online most of the time. It's putting things in perspective. It's goal-directed. And it's not feeling helpless, passive, resigned, and it's not feeling overwhelmed and obsessed with stuff. And so I think this is probably the most important thing. I mean, other than for parents to know, other than how slow the prefrontal cortex develops, which is the most useful thing I've learned in my career, because it's a never give up hope message. But I think that's probably the most useful thing. And we know that that a certain amount of choices, autonomy is really makes you feel less stressed when you have control. And so giving people having a limited number of choices is helpful. But once you get too many, it does get overwhelming. The brain just can't process it. And it starts to feel stressful. You just scroll through Amazon or Netflix. It's a little overwhelming, and when you feel overwhelmed, it's stressful.
Yeah, and that is one of the.
If I could add one thing to that I think ties to the point that Tim was talking about with the work of your book. Antonio Damasio talks about how the best decisions aren't purely rational; they're rooted in emotion, right? Mm-hmm. And so from our perspective, some of the most important work of adolescence, apart from figuring out who you are, is kind of what do you like? What do you want to do? And if we condition kids, for years and years of school to not pay attention to what it is, and try to talk them into, or talk themselves into believing it's important to do things they actually don't want to do. And there's a story in our second book, What Do You Say, where I was meeting with this girl from this wildly affluent family. It was the start of her senior year, and I asked her, say, "Hey, it occurred to me the other day, what is it what do you most like to do?" And her face fell, and she said, "Honestly, I have no idea. I spend all my time and energy meeting other people's expectations for me. I have no idea." And it's not that every 14 or 16 or 18-year-old needs to know what they're going to do with their life, but they should sure as heck be able to spend some time reflecting on what do they actually enjoy. And then, at least to your point, Tim, when you get to the unlimited choices of college, you have some basic idea of I'm kind of going in this direction, or I'm kind of going in that direction, as opposed to I have no idea what I want whatsoever. Because to Bill's point about the prefrontal cortex, it's all about goal-directed behavior, right? And all the executive functions of support of setting goals and achieving them. But all of those things start with knowing where you want to go, right? Seneca, the great Roman statesman, said, for the person who doesn't know where he wants to go, no wind is favorable, right? If luck doesn't help you, if you don't, you're just going to sit there and spin.
Yeah, I think that really speaks to like the heart of our book and how it complements your book so much. Because like you said, all of the self-regulation comes from goal-directed behavior. So how do we help students set goals that they want to actually achieve, right? And so the heart of our book is, it's purposeful goals, right? And so we're using the definition of purpose that ours is, it's living a life that's personally meaningful and also contributes to the world beyond the self. And it has to be like, it can't just be all about you, because if you only did things that were personally meaningful, you just watch Netflix or play video games all day, right? Or if you're only trying to contribute to the world beyond the self, then you're going to sacrifice your own well-being at the altar of doing that. And so that sounds nice in theory, but then it's like, okay, like what you were saying, that these students have to know what is personally meaningful to me, right? What is the contribution in the world that I want to make? And I think a big part of what we do is help people understand these little ingredients about, like, what are the strengths you feel like your best self? What are the skills you want to be developing? What problems in the world that you care about? What needs do you want to be fulfilling? And then what are your core values? And I think the way that we work is kind of, let's understand these ingredients of purpose first before we think about what is a goal, right? And so then we're like, okay, I know strengths, skills, I know these elements of purpose. Then let's do the exploration of like, how do you pursue this in the real world? So,
have you stumbled across Frank Martella? Do you know that name? He's this Finnish philosopher, and he pins down the meaning of life is doing things that are meaningful to you, that make you meaningful to other people. He also dresses like he's a member of the Partridge Family, so he's really entertaining.
So on that, sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Well, when my kids were little, and they're 40 and 37 now, but I just read that the very low correlation between grades in high school and success in life. And so I told my kids, it was like their first grade, I could care less about your grades. What I care about is you're developing yourself so they have something useful and meaningful to offer this world. And I just think that so many of the kids that we work with just have a sense that their whole life is about jumping through hoops. It's about building a resume. And I'm just struck by this research that showed that if you have high school kids, you simply ask them to write for a few minutes about their highest values, it dramatically lowers their test anxiety because it keeps things in perspective. They think about what's really meaningful to them. And kids love to think about what's really important to them, what their true values are. And so I really applaud your work. It's so important. I was lecturing in Houston about the self-driven child a few years ago, and I happened to mention one of the most elite schools in DC, high schools in DC. And this woman came up to me afterwards and said, I'm a therapist here at the Menninger Foundation Clinic, which is a really prestigious mental health clinic in Houston. She said, we know the school in DC really well because so many kids, they get into the most elite colleges, but they can't handle it emotionally. And she said that they just aren't connected with themselves. And they haven't had experience of running their own life. And so they get here, they experience some challenge, and they can't handle it emotionally. So they come here for treatment. And we've been saying for years that we think that kids ought to be able to we should insist that they run their own life before they know how to run their own life before they leave home. And some of that is knowing is exactly what you're focusing on, which is knowing what's important to them, knowing what their purpose is in life, what they value. It's just beautiful what you're doing.
Thank you so much, Bill. Yeah, Tim, you were going to say something.
Well, the way that we think about this is just for like to put perspective for like parents who are listening to this. It's like I have a 3 and a 6-year-old at home, and they're very intrinsically purposeful right now. And we know that because they play, right? They're just curious, they're creative. They don't need a lot of carrots and sticks to just go about their lives. And what the research, and this is a lot of Bell's research, is that kids are all very purposeful up until about 5th, 6th grade. And then what happens in 6th grade is then it says, okay, it turns into what we call a performance mindset, where it's like your actions matter now. You're playing for keeps, like your transcript matters, your grades, getting into the accelerated math courses, this matters. So they go into this performance mode in high school, where it's all about their performance. It's all about just the APs, as Ned, the standardized test scores, just winning the hyper competitive zero-sum game of academics. And then what we notice, they go to graduation and they listen to their graduation speaker. And that graduation speaker is like, follow your passion, do what you love. And these students are like, I've been playing this one game where I'm just trying to win this really competitive game. Now you're telling me do what I love. And Ned, you said like they don't even know what they love. Then we see them when they come to BC or the other colleges they work with. And then they're like, I have to keep my incredibly high performance up. I have to be wildly successful. But now I'm supposed to love every single minute of this at the same time. Right. It's like, and it's just like, and we see these students coming in at BC, like double majors with a minor and doing all this stuff. And they're just feeling that. So what you said really resonated. And that's kind of like a big overarching thing. I have one more question then for Belle before your question, where it's like, I think the elephant in the room is like, yes, self-driven children, trust them to figure it out, have them be autonomous, prioritize sleep over everything. But like we live in this world where there's so much anxiety around parents feeling like if my kid, we really live in a world where it feels like there are a few winners and many, many losers. And so there's this world where it's like, if my kid doesn't get in, that's all nice that they can be self-driven. But if they don't get in to this college, I worry that they're not going to find a job where they can pay their bills and actually, make enough money. So like, and I'm sure, Ned, you must see that all the time, and Bill, you as well. So I'm wondering, like, given that context we're in, what is your message, or how do you talk to parents about that?
Well, to begin with, vote for progressive taxation.
Here.
I mean, I think part of it, I think the key word in there is feel. Parents feel that. And I, talk with kids all the time, because what we feel and what is actually so aren't always the same, right? And particularly fear-based decisions are rarely good ones. And before we come back to this middle ground, I'll also say that so many parents have the idea, or kids have the idea, that if they are successful enough, that everything will come together. I mean, the story that in our book, What He's Saying, when Bill was down in Dallas, talking with all these, student leaders, and he asked these kids, they were like 10th graders, how many of you want to be successful in life? And they all kind of like raised their hand, like, well, duh. And he asked them, what is it necessary?
Oh, yes. I said, how many want to be happy?
Happy, thank you. Happy. My goodness. Happy. And they said, well, and we understand that if we get into a good enough college, that everything else will fall into place. And I thought, well, man, if that were true, not only would I be delivering great, test scores, but I'd be delivering like lifelong happiness. Wouldn't that be amazing? And of course, the science on it, because parents are saying we're pushing our kids because we just want them to be happy. And it is simply not true, and I'll let Bill jump in and talk more about that. It's simply not true that there's some one-to-one correlation between success and happiness. Every time we see, Bill and I go back and forth, when we see some super successful person like Alan Kruger, right? Dale Kruger, all the stuff about who takes his own life. And Bill just emailed or texted me back. He said, apparently depression doesn't give an F about career success or money, right? Or prestige. It's not how it works. And it's just this, it's just wrong. It's wrong. I understand the fear, but if, so much of the work that we need to do as parents is on ourselves, and to lower our own sense of fear about the world. Because when we buy into the scarcity mindset, it's terrible. It's terrible. The way that we work with our kids is controlling and just pumping them full of fear. And we don't get good outcomes from this. And I'll let Bill talk a little more about happiness. We'll hopefully talk about the non-anxious presence, because I have a story I want to share there. But Bill, do you want to talk a little bit more about, actual happiness?
Sure. I mean, I think that I moved from Seattle. I grew up in Seattle, and then I ended up in the East Coast in Washington, D.C. And this is in the mid 80s. And one of the first person that I test says, I only pay for college if my kid goes to Harvard, Yale, Princeton, or Brown. And I'm thinking, this is a different universe than the one I grew up in. And I used to refer to it as a shared psychosis, meaning that the thinking about what makes kids happy and successful is so out of touch with reality that's like psychotic. And then it turns out there's a DSM-5 diagnosis called shared delusional disorder. And that's what we think about this as a shared delusion. that the most important thing in life is prestige, money, how you present on social media, and stuff that actually the science of happiness said that ain't true at all. You know, you're happier when you give money away than when you spend it on yourself. You know, you're happier when you befriend, talk to a stranger than when you sit on a bus by yourself. There's so many things that are counterintuitive about what really makes people happy. And one of the chapters in our new book it's called Talking with Kids About the Pursuit of Happiness. It's all about how do we help kids let's clue them in. I mean, you talk to teenagers about the fact that there's very little, after about $75,000, there's not much correlation between happiness and income. You talk about the science of happiness. And they think, why didn't somebody tell me this? And so I just think that that we live in part of the reason I think for me the main motivating factor for writing The Self-Driven Child, besides I love working with Ned, was simply I want parents to be able to feel less fearful about raising their kids, and they can trust their kids more. They can trust the universe more. We're all living at about the safest time in human history. And so that was the major goal for me, was letting people know it's actually safe to trust your kid. It's actually safe not to worry all the time. It's actually safe to give your kid a lot of autonomy and to give them an accurate model of reality. But one of my friends' kids grew up in Arlington, Virginia, which is a very high achieving area. And he graduated with a 1.67 grade point average. And so he went into the Navy, and he tested into Navy SEALs, but he had a heart problem that was previously undiagnosed. So he wasn't in the SEALs, so he was on a boat. And the admiral really liked him and thought he learned really fast. You could see he's smart. The kid took the SATs, and he's in the second year at Harvard now. And he graduated from high school with a 1.67 grade point average. We see this kind of thing all the time. And we want people to know that in The Self-Driven Child, the last chapter is alternate roots, because it's about people who found a way to contribute to this world where they weren't always a good student, or they never went to college or something. And I just want people to know that this very, as you're saying, that scarcity kind of thinking that Tim and Ned you're talking about, it's just wrong.
Yeah.
And yet there's such a reality behind parents, feeling fearful. And that's one of the things I love about your book, is that you just acknowledge that, yes, you want the best for your children, and you may have a lot of anxiety yourself. And so, we pass it on then to our children. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that non-anxious presence that you talk about, because I think that that's a key part to how parents can, just acknowledge the fact that they have anxiety, and yet how do they interact with their children in that reality.
Right. And I'll real quick point about the fears of parents. I mean, all of our fears as parents aren't really about now. They're about the future, right? And they're the feeling that our kids will get stuck. And from our perspective, the most important outcome of high school and adolescence is not the college you get into. And I'd say this is the test prep guy, but really developing or wiring the brain that you're carrying to adulthood. Because for every kid who's pre-coaches who looks like, oh, they're definitely bound for Harvard, there people are post-coaches, right? And they hit their stride later in ways, because they're just late bloomers, right? Not everything's not in lockstep. The non-anxious presence is we borrowed this term from a guy named Edwin Freeman, who was a business consultant. He was a rabbi. He worked with schools and families and corporations, and he simply made the point that things go better when the person or people in charge aren't overly reactive, aren't overly emotional, in part because all emotions are contagious, right? And fear especially is contagious. And so if in a difficult situation I overreact, it's going to sideline my overactive amygdala. It's going to sideline my kids or other people around me, their prefrontal cortexes, and then it's kind of a mess, right? Where if I in the presence of things not going well can be more calm, it makes it easy for the other people, for our kids to feel safe, and for their prefrontal cortex to come back in line for them. Well, what can I do here? What are my choices? My twin brother's a paramedic, and there's a story in the book where he was so he deals with things that are raw and real and intense, and it was on the scene with something, whatever, I can't remember the details of it. And the family was just there, sort of beside themselves, and they're just, wailing. And he pauses for a moment, and he turns and looks at the family, and he said, "If it helps you, I want to let you know, I'm not worried about what I see here. I'm convinced that this is going to work out fine. If you'd like, I'd be happy to let you know when you should panic. Right? Just stop it, right? Because, not only because fear is contagious, but calm is contagious too, right? Calm, it turns out, since we're talking about Navy SEALs, we can, the calm is contagious is a mantra of the Navy SEALs. And so, for some people are wired this way. Probably people end up in the SEALs are more stress tolerant than the rest of us. But for parents who aren't normally in this direction, that sort of three pieces of advice that I will give. One is to take the long view, because if you knew that the current struggles your kids are having are just part of their path, it'd be a whole lot easier, right? If you can also particularly even when things are super messy, if you can place a really high priority on just enjoying your kid, because it feels like when things aren't going well, that we have to, if we're not paying attention to things aren't going well, like we're bad parents, like the only way to fix this is to focus or harp on this all the time. And it just isn't so, because ultimately our kids have to be a significant part of fixing their problems. We can't fix things for them. Oh, goodness, if we could, that would be amazing. And then the last thing is to really place a priority on trying to lower our own stress. If our kids are having a hard time, we should focus on our sleep. We should focus on time with friends. We should exercise more. We should meditate. And I'll tell a quick story. My son, who's our son, who's just finished up his second-ish year of college, and I say ish because just this time last year, about a month ago last year, I was actually recording the audiobook for What He Say, and I come out of the studio, get my wife on the phone. We've been talking with her son, had been having all these migraines, and they kind of run in the family, and my wife's side of the family. And so she said, I was just talking with that. Let me call him back up. So we're on this three-way call. And while we're on this three-way call, talking about how much ibuprofen is too much, my son drops a word. That's interesting. And a couple sentences later, he drops another word. And then a couple sentences later, it's just gibberish, absolute gibberish. I'm like, uh-oh, this is not good. And so we're on a three-way. I said, Vanessa, can you be a favor? Can you call me on the line? Don't hang up. I don't want you to disconnect us. And call me on the line. And so I said, something's obviously wrong. I think he's having a stroke. Get Matthew back in line, try to talk him through this. Well, long story short, that, they get the ambulance over there, get him to the local hospital, and then they discover he's got a brain tumor. And then life flight him too. And on it goes. And fortunately, he seems to be out of the woods now. But goodness was it a thing. Here's the non-anxious presence part. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks into this where my wife and I are out for dinner. And she said, I've had like 3 people ask me, how are you so calm about this? Now, partly we had great help and, people at Children's Hospital and had confidence that this was going to work out okay. But she said, honestly, I think it's the meditation. So Bill has rubbed off on me in all sorts of ways, including I've been a practitioner of TM, Transcendental Meditation, for probably a decade now. And my wife started a couple of years ago. And her whole family, they're lovely people, super capable, just wonderful, but all pretty neurotic. And so that's kind of her genetic heritage. And she said, honest to gosh, she said, I don't think that I would be handling this the way that I'm handling it now if I hadn't learned TM. Because from our perspective, if the inflows of stress aren't balanced by healthy outflows of stress, all sorts of bad things happen, including our inability as parents to be non-anxious present and our inability to confer to kids the autonomy that they absolutely need for their own stress tolerance and their own charting of their own paths or intrinsic motivation. So we take this non-anxious presence thing pretty seriously.
Yes, you do. And it reminds me of this quote that the most important relationship you have is with yourself, and all other relationships are an outgrowth of that.
Yeah.
And yet I know that the parents or others who are, watching this right now are probably wondering, how do you foster a relationship that has all of the benefits that we talk about in our 2 books? And I'm wondering if maybe, Tim, if you could start with talking about how to practically cultivate relationship with your child, because it's maybe not obvious, especially as your child gets into the teenage years and isn't wanting to talk as much or has other social groups outside of their family. I'm wondering if you could share some tips for
Yeah.
families.
Well, it's really interesting, Ned, that you say that like fear and anxiety are contagious, because I mean, we're really into the science of purpose, because purpose is, when you look at the research, it's this magic bullet around mental health, physical health. Students who have a sense of purpose are more engaged in academics, better relationships, going to college at higher rates, 10 times more likely to be thriving in their careers. It's literally like purposeful students are doing better than everyone else, but like we're doing a lot of research. There's not as much validated research on how do you cultivate purpose in students, right? And Bell's research has actually found that while anxiety is contagious, purpose is actually contagious. So that when students, and so when students are connected to people who are purposeful, they see, well, like that person is showing up on fire every day. They're handling stress really, really well. They're pursuing big noble goals. Like it opens their eyes to the way they want to live. And they say, I want some of that. And I know that happens with you two like people see how purposeful you both are in the work that you're doing, and it rubs off and it's contagious. And so I think for parents to, let's spread a purpose contagion, not a stress contagion. It is asking yourself so we talk about success and happiness all of the time. That's the only thing we're talking about. But we never say, how do I define success? As a parent, what is success for me? Right? And then what is happiness? And so a lot of the times, like you said, we think success is getting into a highly rejective college, right? and you're just exactly, you're laughing because you're like, okay, but then what? Right? Oh, you go get a great career. Okay, and then what? You become a doctor. Then what? It's like, okay, if you can be a crappy doctor. You could be a doctor who works for the mafia, or like there's like, and so you do this on and on and on, and you have to do this reflection of like, what is ultimate success for me? What does happiness mean for me? And those are super scary questions. You know what I mean? And so it's like a big part of our book. Yes, it's for parents on how to deal with students, but it's giving everybody just like, here's some language, here's some really, really big questions to be like, what you need to start drilling down into, like, what is your ultimate goal as a parent? What is your ultimate success and happiness? And what we find is that when you can get a moment, it's just like, it's having a meaningful relationship where I'm supporting them on the journey of life or whatever it is. You don't need to wait 6 years down the line until they get into Yale or Harvard. You can start doing that right now. And it's doing the same thing for the students. And I think the thing that we've noticed to have those purposeful relationships, what Belle was talking about, is we talk about in the book, really your relationship with your kid is the number one correlate of anything in there. And it doesn't matter what college they go to if they are thriving. And so we call these, to build these relationships, we call building moments that matter. And it's like micro moments that matter. And essentially it's very simple. A moment that matter is a moment when your kid or your young person or your employee or whoever you're trying to engage with, they are talking about something that matters to them, and they feel like they matter in discussing that with someone else, right? And that work starts with the work that you all are doing with, well, like, what are your interests? What are your goals? You have to start meeting them where they're at and be like, what music are you listening to? Show me a funny TikTok. What video games are you playing right now? I loved your little anecdote in your new book about video games and how to think about video games. So if you have a kid who can't get off their phone, be like, hey, what is it? What are you watching on TikTok? What is the little TikTok corner you're on? Or what is this game? Why is it so important to you? What strengths are you using? And in that moment, that kid is going to say, the answer is going to be meaningful to them. And that you asked is signal, and then you are actively listening is signaling to them, I must matter because they're giving me the time to do this. And so it doesn't have to be this big, big thing, but it is really about that intention. So
yeah, and I think that really connects with your concept of empathy and validation. So rather than as parents, sometimes when we're listening to our children, we have our agenda. We're listening not to hear, but to respond, right? And come at them with our agenda. And of course, they can immediately smell that from a million miles away. So what you're talking about is like the relationship matters most. And I want to just direct a question to Bill next. What happens though when your kid is struggling or they're stuck? What does relationship look like with your child then? You're in a situation, their child is struggling. How do you help them get unstuck and still take care of the relationship?
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I remember years ago sitting with parents. This actually happened multiple times. Sitting with parents who were telling about my kids depressed or it's not going well, and one of the parents would start to cry, and they say, "I just want him to feel good about himself." And I'd say, "Well, I think we could more convincingly help him feel good about himself if we aren't worried he's sick about it." Which again comes back to this non-anxious presence. It's just counterintuitive to most parents. If my kid's not doing well, one of the most important things I can do is manage my own anxiety. And one of the points that we really like the chapter in a new book called "The Language and Silence of Change." And we looked at something called motivational interviewing and this new SPACE program. It's an acronym, Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions, out of Yale. Both of which take the point of view that to help people change, you don't try to change them. And so I think that so often that parents feel that if I didn't, I used to ask parents when I did therapy, what were you afraid would happen if you weren't so upset about where your kid is right now? They'd say, well, either they'd say, well, I'd have to be completely insensitive. And I'd say, is that really true? I mean, could you look at it another way? Could you see this as part of his path, as something he has to go through? Or they say, I wouldn't be motivated to really help him any way I could. I'd say, is that true? I mean, you're saying this out of love, you wouldn't be motivated to help him. And so my feeling is a big part of it is adjusting our own attitude and realizing that if we try to change our kids or change anybody really, and they're not asking us to help them change, all we get is conflict and resistance. And so I think that one of the principles in our book is both our books is that we offer help. We don't try to force it down kids' throats. And I think that if their kids are suicidal, they're really drug involved, then we put them in a program. We do something that whether they want to or not. But short of that, we remember that we ask ourselves, whose problem is it? It's because of the way we're wired as mammals, it's very hard to remember if my kid's struggling, that's his problem. And I don't mean that's your problem, buddy. I don't mean it like that. But I mean respectfully. This is an opportunity for him to figure out and grow from it. And so it's so much has to do with our own attitude, not trying to feel like I got to change my kid, so I got to put all this pressure on him, not forcing help on kids that they don't want. Ned, do you want to add on?
Yeah, well, and to another piece of Bell's question that when we see our kids struggling, when they seem stuck in a really hard place, this motivational interviewing has a few insights that are useful. One, the first is that we have a right team reflex, right? If Bell starts telling me about our problems, I immediately start, well, what have you tried this? Have you done that? Whatever, and to the person on the receiving end, I can be like, oh, seriously? Right? As though if you'd only done this, you dope, you wouldn't be in this situation. And it's so easy. I'm trying to give advice, but the recipient can feel criticized, right? And so we have a hard time just listening and validating those perspectives. And then, because then what'll happen is it's very easy. And motivational interviewing, I should say, was created by a couple psychologists who are working with problem drinkers. And traditionally, you tell these people, here, you should try this, you should try that, or try to scare them of, you got to give up the bottle, man. You're going to lose your wife, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your health, So that would motivate me. And the second insight beyond there's this writing reflex. The second insight is that people are ambivalent about change. If I am a kid who's really doing poorly in school, it's not lost on me that if I got better grades, that my parents would get off my back, that my friends wouldn't think I'm a dope, that my teachers wouldn't be giving me the hairy eyeball all the time. But I also know that I might have to do work for teachers I don't like on stuff that I don't care about, or I'd have to give up time playing video games or sleeping or whatever I want to do. And this is the really important one, I think, is that a lot of kids where learning isn't going well, learning isn't easy. And if they redouble their efforts and work really, really hard to go from a 1.6 to a 2.1, and then you know exactly what the limit of your academic abilities is, that's really stressful. That's really threatening. So it's much easier to sit there and so then you work harder at this and say, no, it won't work because. And so we end up, when we give people advice that they happen to ask for, they start fighting those reasons. And we argue one side of the equation, they argue the other side. So the great insight of this is just really to ask open-ended questions. So tell me how school's going. It's stupid, right? We tend to want to then argue, well, tell me why, right? Tell me more about this. And we listen without judging. We use reflective listening to repeat back. So what I got from you saying, you feel like this homework is a complete waste of time and your teacher's really a jerk. Yeah. Well, I guess you have reasons to think that. Almost invariably, though, when we don't, to your point, come with an agenda, Bill, our kids will say, I kind of wish I could do a little better. Well, tell me more about that, right? And it takes a huge amount of control, of self-control for us as parents to hold that space and hold that space and hold that space and wait for kids to tiptoe in the direction of what might be some different choices or maybe better choices. But
Yeah.
it isn't easy. I mean, it's the reason why any therapist, you don't start giving. I mean, the first time you with a therapist, right? You're saying like, did we do anything? They're not going to start giving you solutions because it takes hours to build trust, right? And to get because it really isn't about what I as a therapist do, or I as a teacher do, or I as a parent do. It's what the kid or the patient or your student, what they do, and we're trying to create that space. And so this motivational interview is really, it's powerful stuff. Obviously, they're trained clinicians to do this, but the lessons from this of open-ended questions, reflect and validate, listen for change talk, and then you can pivot into being the kind of consultant that we talk about. Then you've got the ability to give advice.
Yeah, I mean, we're both clinical therapists, so we use motivate. It's almost like motivational interviewing is embedded into all of our book. And just I'll show, and this is a practice that parents or anyone can use, is when I was a school counselor, college counselor, students coming in, we're trying to figure out what they want to do after high school. I would ask them, okay, after high school, if you could do anything you want, knowing you're going to be successful in that endeavor, you're going to be financially stable and secure, so money won't be an issue.
Yeah.
Your family and friends and society will encourage you in doing this thing, right? So taking it,
Love that.
Abundance
and then
mindset.
right. Well, then I'm just like, what would you do? Anything in the world. You can do anything. And what I'm listening for is, are they saying college or not? And if they weren't saying college, I am not going to assume they don't. I'm that makes me assume that they probably have a neutral to negative relationship with college. And so I'm not going to assume that their definition of success is just going to college. But then whatever answer they give me, it is, it'd be starting my own business. It'd be traveling the world. It'd be becoming a social media influencer. Then it's using motivational interviewing to be like, what are you said you want to travel the world. What are you really looking for? Is it novelty? Is it adventure? Is it growth? And then it's like, okay, we're getting somewhere. Now let's solve for that problem, right? And figure out where we can go. And one little story that made me really have this idea is because I worked in a very like blue collar high school where there was like affluent, but there was also low income, middle income. I have a student come in, very, 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 very smart student. He comes in, he has like a 1.8 GPA, good, same as yours, very specific 1.8. And I'm like, how are you doing in school? And he's like, fantastic. He's about to graduate. I'm like, fantastic. Tell me more about that. And he was like, my parents are day laborers. They wake up at 4:30 a.m. every single day. They traveled from Boston, Massachusetts down to Rhode Island. They were working 13 hours a day. They were coming home exhausted every single day. Money was very, very tight for them. And he was like, I realized as a ninth grader that I didn't want to have them go to college. I didn't want to go to college, take up debt, and put an additional financial burden on my family.
Wow.
So not only did he view college as not as a positive thing, he viewed college as a complete threat to his family. And so what he did, he very intentionally chose, I'm going to do the bare minimum to get by. I'm not going to do so bad that I'm going to become a red flag for my school counselor. So people are going to put attention on me, but I'm not going to do good enough for people to put me on a 4-year college track. Right. And so, and that led to a conversation about, no one had talked to him about financial aid or like financial aid options or different options about money and how you can do like bring that in. He ended up going to a year up program, which is this amazing program in Boston where it's like college readiness, and he's doing amazing now. But that's just like a long story short. That's the power of motivational interviewing, to not be able to not just assume we know what success looks like, what we know what happiness looks like, and just be open and honest and curious about motivations. So Yeah.
So let me repeat that back. So anything, you can do anything you like, you would be financially successful, and you would have the approval of parents and society at large.
Yeah,
Is
you would be successful in it. So like take away imposter syndrome, like so you would be successful. Like it would work out in whatever you're doing, right? You'd take this risk and it would work out. You'd be financially stable and secure. So you don't like making money doesn't have to be your issue. And then like, yeah, it would be socially acceptable to do this thing. Like
I
you wouldn't
love
be
it.
shunned or
When you talk about the ambivalence, it's you basically attended to and removed all the reasons why not to, right? Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, and one thing that just really comes to mind is that one criticism I think that some have of the notion of purpose, having purpose, is that this idea that purpose is only for very privileged people who have the ability to make all the choices and have things work out for them. But what's been really interesting from the research in our lab that really examines purpose across populations, those who are very affluent, high achieving communities, to those like most impoverished communities, including a study that we did, a longitudinal study that we did in the Guatemala city dump. We noticed that,
In the city
young
dump?
people, yeah, in the city, yes, the communities surrounding the Guatemala city dump. So these are the poorest of the poor, young people who are, subsisting on selling goods that they pick out of the trash, and what we found is that young people, they all want a sense of purpose. They need to know why they matter in the world. It doesn't matter what background they've come from or what their means are. And those young people who are able to identify what matters to them and what they care about, and how they want to make their contribution, whether it's just to work a little so that they can afford to help their mother or father out, that is purpose. And so, I think that it's just really important for us to keep in mind that just exactly what you all write about in your book is that young people, they have in themselves a lot of motivation and drive. And I think that parents, we oftentimes worry that they won't hustle hard enough or work hard enough and be successful. But actually, it's hard to find a young person who absolutely has zero motivation. Maybe they've come to that point because they're being resistant of, feeling pressured or told what to do, but intrinsically, they want to matter and they want to do something that matters in their life. So in the final moments, I wonder if we could just share, each of us, a little bit about what we personally hope readers will get from our books. Like, why did we write this book? And what do we hope that readers will take away from it? So I wonder if we could start with you, Bill.
Well, as I mentioned, for me, the self-driven child, the main motivation is to help parents feel that it's safe, not to be overly controlling of their kids, and it's safe to treat their kids respectfully. And it's safe to be a non-anxious presence and not have to worry about them. And that being overly controlling is actually terrible for kids. So the new book about communicating with kids, really the goal really for me was thinking about the various things that we communicate with kids or don't communicate with them about. I mean, there's the chapter on happiness in our book looks at Martin Seligman's model of the PERMA, which is positive emotion and engagement and relationships and meaning. The meaning part that's intrinsic. We need a sense of meaning in order to have a fulfilled life. So I thought there's various things that we can communicate with kids about that are counterintuitive, including the idea of helping kids change, the thinking about technology and sleep, where we feel like we have to be the technology police. And the more we try to control kids, the more they fight back. And if we simply treat them respectfully and say, tell me about that game, or tell me what pot does for you, that it opens up that possibility that the kids will, they could, because they're ambivalent, they'll say, I'm spending way too much. The problem is I'm spending way too much time on this. Or the problem, I had one of my clients last summer sent him a draft copy of our new book, the chapter on change. And she just said to her 15-year-old kid who's smoking a lot of pot, what does this do for you? And he waxed rhapsodic about all the benefits he gets from not being so anxious. But then he said, but I can't practice basketball as much. And so he stopped smoking pot at the end of the summer, and because he wanted to be a good basketball player. And simply treating him respectfully, not judging, and kind of understand before we judge. Huge.
Love that, Bill. Thank you. Tim, can you say 1 minute or 30 seconds?
Yeah, I mean, I think if anyone we both wrote these books. I wonder how many citations are in your book. We have like over 300 in ours. We probably have over like 500 citations in all the research. And like basically what we're trying to say is like no one wants to be a super stressful, anxious, overly controlling parent. You know, they feel like they have to, but no one wants to be that way.
Yeah.
But they don't trust that if they let go and they let their kid, if they trust their kid to figure it out, to do their own thing, that they don't feel like that is actually going to lead to the end destination they want. I think the biggest fear is that if I'm going to make some unintended mistake that I couldn't have even seen in the moment, and somehow that is just going to close all the doors of opportunities for my student. And we're like all three of these books are a complete manual for like, actually, we're going to give you how the research shows that doing the thing you want, doing the right thing is actually also the thing that's going to make your student more successful and happy. And so that's the irony here, is that our entire book is about how to cultivate and discover purpose in your students in the first half, and then how to apply it in their parent, in their family, in high school, in college, and their career. And so what it looks like in practice is actually pretty fun. And it's a lot more like lower expectations. You don't have to have all the answers and you can come along for the ride. So I think we have the same mission where it's like, we're asking parents to chill out and trust their kids, essentially what we're doing. But here's the manual in how to support them along the way. What about you, Ned?
Love it, Ned.
You know, I'm so enjoying this really intense focus on purpose, because I was thinking about this. I don't know, it was a month or so ago, and I was sort of one of these kind of happy days, and when I was reflecting on what I most enjoy, what gives me just so much energy, is at least for me feeling that I'm helping other people. And everybody, you know, everyone's purpose can be different. For other people, it can be I'm making money because I'm supporting my family. There's a million different reasons. But I remember a couple years ago, I've worked during the school year. I've worked 6 days a week since 1993, and I was meeting this new client at 8 o'clock on Saturday morning. And I'm walking down. I'm sort of doing with these, you know, snapping fingers. And the mom turns to me. She said, "Are you always like this?" And I said, I am when I'm talking with kids and I feel like I'm helpful. And, you know, to your point about this kind of purposefulness contagion, you know, when we're really at our best with our kids, we're not exerting power over them. We're not controlling them. We're influencing them. And the point that you raised, Belle, that our first relationship starts with ourselves. And so I really imagine this book being one that we can help our kids by helping ourselves, you know, that we can start to realign how we think about school and work generally. And ultimately, when we have this relationship with ourselves and then with our kids, where we're exerting influence on them, not power on them. To me, this is really significant because it occurred to me, my kids are 18 and 20, that if everything goes right in my life, I will have a relationship with my children for decades longer than I ever had a relationship with my children as children, right? And there's no way that I could possibly, even if I wanted to, exert power over 25 or 35 or 45-year-old. And so if that's the case, why don't we start at the youngest possible age with our kids, working with them in a respectful way that says, look, I have thoughts about what's good for your life, but so do you. And trying to do this in this consultative, non-anxious way, where we're crafting this relationship that's one about influence, not power, so that we have staying power. So when our kids go off to college with hopes and dreams and a suitcase full of our money, they still want our input.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
And I would just add to that, you know, I think that you all really covered it. It's being able to come alongside parents and families who are doing the best they can. And we know that parenting is hard, and we all have skin in the game. We are raising our kids with our ups and downs and many mistakes and trial and error. But, you know, that we're trying to bring some science to what works. This is about science that works. And we hope that we can lend some support along your journey. So thank you so much, Bill and Ned, for being with us today. This has been fantastic. You all are brilliant. Everyone go and buy the new book, What Do You Say? And then the other book as well, Self-Driven Child, which is also a fantastic piece of work.
Your book is out Tuesday.
And our book is out on Tuesday, How to Navigate Life. So we're so excited to hear what everybody thinks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
What a pleasure.